He fired the black nanny on Christmas Eve, without knowing she was the only person who could make his silent son speak again. Hours later, as snow fell outside his mansion, the little boy whispered his first word in 2 years. But the woman who made it possible was already gone. The Hawthorne estate in Upper Manhattan glittered like a postcard of perfection. Crystal lights wrapped around towering pine trees. A grand Christmas tree stood in the center of the marble hall, decorated with gold ornaments and delicate glass angels. Soft carols played through hidden speakers, filling every corner of the house with warmth. But inside, there was no warmth, only silence. Ethan Hawthorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the falling snow. At 42, he was one of the most powerful men in New York's financial world. His tailored suit fit him perfectly. His watch cost more than most people's yearly salary, and his name opened doors others couldn't even see. Yet none of it mattered in this house. Behind him, sitting on the cold marble floor near the Christmas tree, was his 7-year-old son, Noah. The boy hadn't spoken a single word in 2 years. Not since that night. Not since the accident that had taken his mother away, just days before Christmas. Doctors called it trauma. Specialists offered therapy, medication, hope wrapped in expensive promises. But nothing worked. Noah remained locked in silence, his wide eyes watching the world like a place he no longer trusted. Ethan had tried everything, and then he stopped trying. Instead, he controlled. Every nanny that came into this house lasted no more than a few weeks. Some said the boy was too difficult. Others said Ethan himself was impossible to work with. He didn't trust easily, not after losing the one person who had held his world together. Love, to him, had become a liability. That was why, when the agency recommended a new nanny just days before Christmas, Ethan almost refused. But something about her file made him pause. Her name was Lila Johnson, 30 years old. No prestigious background, no elite training, just a quiet note at the bottom of her profile. Former church singer, known for calming children with music. Ethan had scoffed when he read it. Music? His son didn't need songs. He needed results. Still, with no better option and pressure mounting from his advisors who whispered about his unstable household image, Ethan agreed to hire her temporarily. Just until after Christmas. When Lila first stepped into the mansion, she didn't react the way most people did. She didn't stare at the chandeliers or the marble floors. She didn't look impressed. She looked observant. Her warm brown eyes moved quietly across the room before settling on Noah. She didn't approach him right away. She didn't speak. She simply sat a few feet away on the floor and hummed, a soft, gentle melody, barely louder than the falling snow outside. For the first time in months, Noah blinked and turned his head. Ethan noticed, and for a brief moment, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. Hope. But hope was dangerous, and Ethan Hawthorne had learned, the hard way, that anything that looked like a miracle usually came with a cost. He had no idea that in just a few days, he would make a decision that would almost destroy the only chance his son had to heal. And by the time he realized the truth, it might already be too late. 2 years ago, the Hawthorne family had looked very different. Back then, the mansion had not been silent. It had been alive. Laughter used to echo through the long marble halls. Christmas music played too loudly, because she liked it that way. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and fresh cookies, and little Noah would run barefoot across the living room, chasing the sound of his mother's voice. Her name was Emily Hawthorne, and she had been the warmth in every cold corner of Ethan's world. Where Ethan was sharp, controlled, and distant, Emily was soft, radiant, and endlessly patient. She had a way of making people feel seen, even when they tried to hide. Especially Ethan. She was the one who convinced him that life didn't have to be all numbers, deals, and power. She was the one who gave him Noah, and for a brief, fragile moment, Ethan had been happy. Until the night, everything shattered. It was just 3 days before Christmas. Snow had started falling early that evening, coating the city in a quiet, glowing white. Emily insisted they go out. Just a short drive, she had said, laughing as she wrapped a scarf around Noah's tiny neck. I want him to see the lights downtown. Ethan almost said no. He had a call, a deal closing, something important. There was always something important. But Emily had smiled at him in that way he could never refuse. Come on, she whispered. Work can wait tonight. So he went. That decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. The roads were slick. The visibility was poor. But the city looked magical, glowing under layers of snow and light. Noah sat in the back seat, pressed against the window, his small breath fogging the glass as he pointed at decorations and laughed. Ethan remembered that laugh. He would replay it in his mind over and over again, because it was the last time he ever heard it. The truck came out of nowhere. A flash of headlights. A deafening crash. Metal twisting. Glass shattering. Emily's scream. And then silence. When Ethan opened his eyes, everything felt wrong. The world had tilted. The car was crushed on one side. Snow mixed with smoke. The air tasted like iron. He turned. Emily was slumped against the door, unmoving. Emily? His voice shook. Emily? Stay with me. But she didn't answer. She never would again. In the back seat, Noah was awake. But he wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He was just staring. His wide, terrified eyes locked onto his mother's still body. And in that moment, something inside him broke. At the hospital, doctors called it shock, then trauma, then something deeper they couldn't fully explain. Noah stopped speaking that night. Completely. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. Not a word. Not a sound. No matter how many specialists Ethan brought in, no matter how much money he spent, nothing reached him. It was as if the boy had locked himself behind a door and thrown away the key. Ethan blamed himself. If he had stayed home, if he had driven differently, if he had said no, guilt became his shadow. And grief, his armor. He buried himself in work, building walls of control around every part of his life. Emotions became liabilities. Trust became weakness. And anyone who came too close, especially to his son, was pushed away before they could fail him, because failure had already cost him everything. But Lila Johnson's story was different. She had known loss too, not in a single violent moment like Ethan, but slowly, painfully, piece by piece. She grew up in a small, struggling neighborhood in Chicago, raised by a grandmother who believed music could heal anything. Sundays were spent in a tiny church, where Lila's voice filled the room like light breaking through darkness. People used to say she was meant for something greater, a stage, a career, a life beyond survival. But life had other plans. When her younger sister fell ill, Lila gave up everything. The auditions, the scholarships, the dreams. She worked 2 jobs, then 3, took care of hospital visits, medications, sleepless nights. She sang less, spoke less, but somehow, her warmth never faded, even when her sister didn't make it. Even when she was left alone in a world that had taken too much. Lila didn't harden. She softened. And somewhere along the way, she learned something Ethan never had. That broken hearts don't need control. They need understanding. Back in the Hawthorne mansion, as Christmas lights flickered against the cold night, 2 very different kinds of grief had finally crossed paths. One, buried under silence. The other, quietly reaching out. And neither of them knew that the child caught between them was the key to everything. Lila didn't try to fix Noah. That was the first thing that made her different. Every specialist before her had arrived with plans, techniques, expectations. They spoke in careful tones, asked structured questions, waited for responses that never came. When Noah didn't answer, they tried harder. When he withdrew, they labeled it. Lila did none of that. On her second day in the Hawthorne mansion, she simply sat on the floor again, this time a little closer than before, and placed a small wooden music box between them. She didn't open it right away. She just let it sit there. Noah noticed. His eyes flickered toward it, then away, then back again. Still silent, still guarded. Lila smiled gently. Not at him, but at the moment. Then she opened the box. A soft melody drifted into the room. Simple, slow, familiar in a way that didn't demand attention but invited it. Noah's fingers twitched, just slightly, but Lila saw it, and she didn't react, because sometimes the smallest movements carried the biggest meaning. From that day on, she built a rhythm around him, not a routine forced on him, but one shaped with him. Mornings began quietly. No sudden greetings, no overwhelming energy. Just soft footsteps, warm light filtering through the curtains, and sometimes a hum. Always that hum. In the afternoons, she introduced small activities: drawing, stacking blocks, baking. The first time she brought him into the kitchen, Noah stood stiffly by the doorway, unsure, unmoving. The scent of cinnamon filled the air as she mixed ingredients slowly, deliberately. She didn't ask him to help. She just left space. After a long moment, he stepped closer, then closer still, until finally, his small hand reached out and touched the edge of the table. Lila didn't look at him, but her voice softened as she spoke to the air. "Careful, it's a little messy over here." Noah didn't pull away. That was new. Days passed. Then, something even more unexpected happened. Noah smiled. It was brief, barely there, but real. It happened when Lila burned a batch of cookies. She stared at them dramatically, placed a hand on her chest, and sighed. "Well, I guess we just invented Christmas charcoal." For a second, nothing. Then, the tiniest lift at the corner of Noah's lips. Lila pretended not to notice, but her heart held on to that moment like something sacred. Upstairs, Ethan watched everything, not openly, never openly, but from a distance, from behind half-closed doors, from reflections in glass. At first, he dismissed it. Temporary reactions, coincidences, false hope. But the changes were undeniable. Noah was different, still silent, but present, engaged, watching, waiting. And that terrified Ethan more than anything, because hope meant risk, and risk meant loss. One evening, as snow began to fall heavier outside, Lila sat by the large Christmas tree, its lights casting soft reflections across the room. Noah sat beside her, closer than ever before. She began to hum again, a familiar melody, a Christmas carol, slow, gentle, almost like a whisper wrapped in music. After a moment, she reached out and placed a small ornament in his hand. A glass angle. He stared at it, his fingers tightening slightly around its delicate wings. Then, carefully, he leaned forward and placed it on the tree. It wobbled, almost fell, but stayed. Lila smiled softly. "You fixed it," she murmured. Noah looked at the ornament, then at her, and for a brief, fragile second, it looked like he was about to say something. His lips parted, a breath caught. Ethan, standing just beyond the doorway, froze. Everything in him stilled. The world seemed to hold its breath. But then, a loud voice broke the moment. "Mr. Hawthorne, your call is on line 2. The interruption shattered the silence. Noah flinched. The moment vanished. His expression closed again, retreating behind the invisible walls he knew too well. Lila didn't react, but Ethan did. His jaw tightened. His chest felt unfamiliar, like something had slipped through his defenses before he could stop it. Later that night, as the house returned to its usual quiet, Ethan stood alone in his study, staring at the city lights beyond the glass. For the first time in 2 years, he allowed himself to think something dangerous. What if she could reach him? But just as quickly, he shut the thought down, because if Lila Johnson succeeded where everyone else had failed, then losing her would destroy everything all over again. And Ethan Hawthorne had already decided. He would never let himself lose again, even if it meant pushing away the one person his son needed most. The shift began quietly, too quietly. At first, it was just a look, a pause, a hesitation in Ethan's otherwise precise routine. He started noticing things he hadn't allowed himself to see before. Noah no longer sat frozen in corners. He followed Lila, not closely, not obviously, but always within reach, like a shadow learning how to trust light again. And that unsettled Ethan, because it wasn't controlled. It wasn't measurable. It wasn't something he could fix with money or strategy. It was something else. Something fragile. Something that could disappear just as quickly as it came. And that made it dangerous. One afternoon, Ethan was in his study when raised voices echoed faintly from downstairs. Not shouting, but tension, sharp enough to cut through silence. He stepped out. The scene unfolded in the living room. Noah was on the floor, breathing unevenly, his small hands pressed against his ears. His body trembled, panic flooding through him like something unseen had taken hold. Lila knelt a few feet away, not touching him, not rushing him, just speaking softly. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm right here." But Ethan didn't hear calm. He saw failure. "What happened?" His voice cut through the room like ice. Lila looked up, steady but careful. He got overwhelmed. "I think the music. I told you not to overstimulate him." Her voice remained gentle. "It wasn't loud. It was just, you don't decide that." Silence fell, heavy, cold. Noah flinched at the tone. Leela noticed. Ethan didn't. "I'm handling this," he said sharply. "You're not," she replied quietly. That was the first mistake. Not the words, but the truth inside them. Ethan's expression hardened. "I hired you to follow instructions, and I'm here to help him," she said, her voice still calm but firmer now. "He doesn't need control right now. He needs, I decide what he needs." The finality in his tone left no room for discussion. No room for her. No room for what had been slowly building between her and Noah. Behind them, the boy's breathing worsened, faster, more panicked. Lila turned her attention back to him immediately, lowering her voice again. "Noah, look at me. Just breathe." For a second, he did. His eyes flickered toward her. His body stilled, just slightly. But Ethan stepped forward. "That's enough." And just like that, the moment broke. Noah recoiled. The connection snapped. Leela froze, not because she was afraid, but because she understood something Ethan didn't. That interruption had cost them something. That night, the tension didn't fade. It spread like a quiet storm moving through the house. By evening, it had already reached beyond the walls. A phone call, then another. Ethan's business associates had begun to talk. A nanny spending too much time alone with his son. Unusual behavior. Concerns about boundaries. Someone even used the phrase, "She might be trying to get close to you through the child." It was absurd, but it was enough. Because doubt didn't need truth. It only needed space. And Ethan had already created too much of it. Later that night, he stood in the hallway outside Noah's room. The door was slightly open. Inside, Lila sat on the floor again. No music this time. No humming. Just quiet presence. Noah sat beside her. Not speaking, but not withdrawing either. Just there. Ethan watched, and something inside him twisted. Because it looked real, and if it was real, then losing it would hurt. More than he was willing to risk. The next morning came colder than the last. Snow covered the ground in thick silence. Christmas Eve. Lila stood in the living room, adjusting a small ornament Noah had placed the day before. Behind her, Ethan's voice broke through the stillness. "You're done here." She turned slowly. Not surprised, just disappointed. "I see," she said softly. Ethan didn't meet her eyes. "This arrangement is no longer necessary." A pause. Then, quieter. "You've crossed boundaries." Lila glanced briefly toward Noah. He was watching, completely still, completely aware. "I never crossed anything," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not how it appears." "And that matters more than what's true?" He didn't answer. Because the truth wasn't the problem. Fear was. Lila nodded slowly. Understanding. Not agreeing. Just understanding. She walked toward the door, stopping only once. For Noah. She knelt slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to be okay." No response. No movement. But his eyes followed her, all the way to the door, until it closed. And just like that, the house returned to silence. But this time, it felt heavier than ever, because something had been there, something real, and Ethan Hawthorne had just sent it away. The silence didn't return gently. It crashed back into the Hawthorne mansion like something alive. Heavier, colder, more final than before. That night, Noah didn't sit by the Christmas tree. He didn't move. He didn't respond. He didn't even look at the lights that had once held his attention. He just sat in the same spot Lila had left him, staring at the door, waiting. At first, Ethan told himself it was temporary, a reaction, a phase, something that would pass. But hours turned into a full day, and Noah didn't change. He refused food, didn't sleep, didn't engage. Even when Ethan tried to sit near him, the boy shifted away subtly but clearly. It wasn't fear, it was absence, like something essential had been removed, and nothing else could replace it. By the second night, panic began to creep in, the kind Ethan couldn't control, the kind no amount of money could silence. "Call the doctor," he ordered. They came, they assessed, they spoke in calm, clinical tones. Regression, emotional trigger, loss of attachment figure, words that sounded small, but felt devastating. One of them said something that stayed. "He's not shutting down again. He's grieving again." Ethan didn't respond, but something inside him cracked, because for the first time, he realized this wasn't about control. It never had been. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan walked past the living room. The Christmas tree still stood, glowing softly in the dark, and beneath it, he saw something that made him stop. The glass angel, the one Noah had placed himself. It had fallen, lying on its side, one wing chipped. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly, he picked it up, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his chest tightened, not from grief, but from recognition, because that fragile, broken ornament looked exactly like what was happening to his son. The next morning, everything changed, not with a decision, but with a sound. Ethan was halfway down the stairs when he heard it. A cry, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. He froze, because he hadn't heard Noah cry like that since the night of the accident. Desperate, uncontrolled. Ethan rushed into the living room. Noah was on the floor, clutching the small wooden music box Lila had brought, his body shaking, tears streaming silently down his face. And then, it happened. The thing Ethan had waited 2 years for. The thing he had paid countless specialists to achieve. The thing he had almost given up on completely. Noah spoke. Soft, broken, barely a whisper. "I want." Ethan's breath caught. He stepped closer, afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. "Noah." His voice trembled. "What did you say?" The boy's lips moved again, struggling, fighting through something invisible. "I want her." Silence. The world stopped. Ethan dropped to his knees in front of him. "Who, Noah?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Who do you want?" Noah looked up, straight at him, eyes filled with something Ethan hadn't seen in years. Need. And then, Mommy. The word shattered everything. Ethan felt it, physically, like something breaking open inside his chest. Because Noah wasn't calling for Emily. He was calling for Lila. At that exact moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. Not the assumptions, not the whispers, not the fear. The truth. Lila hadn't crossed a boundary. She had built something Ethan didn't understand. Something real, something his son needed. And he had destroyed it. A knock came from behind. "Sir," it was the house manager, holding a tablet. "There's something you need to see." Ethan stood slowly, his legs unsteady. On the screen, security footage from 2 days ago. The moment in the living room, the incident, the one he thought proved Lila had failed. But now, seen clearly, understood differently, Noah had panicked, not because of her, but because of the sudden noise. And Lila had done everything right. She hadn't overwhelmed him, hadn't forced him, hadn't hurt him. She had grounded him, calmed him, reached him, until Ethan interrupted. The realization hit harder than anything before it. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had taken the one person helping his son and pushed her away. Ethan didn't hesitate. For the first time in years, he didn't analyze, didn't calculate, didn't control. He acted. "Find her," he said, his voice sharp, urgent. Now. Within minutes, the car was ready. Snow fell heavily outside, covering the city in white. Christmas Eve, the same night everything had once been lost, and now, the only chance to fix it. As the car sped through the streets, Ethan sat in silence. But inside, everything was moving. Memories, regret, realization, and one undeniable truth. This time, he wouldn't let fear take something away again, because somewhere out there was the woman his son had just called Mommy. The snow hadn't stopped. It fell heavier now, blanketing the city in a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. Christmas Eve had arrived, and New York glowed beneath layers of light and white. Inside the car, Ethan barely noticed any of it. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't calculating outcomes or controlling variables. It was remembering Noah's voice. That single word, Mommy. It echoed over and over again, not as a miracle, but as a truth he had almost destroyed. "Sir, we found her," the driver said gently, pulling the car to a stop. Ethan stepped out, before the engine even settled. The place was small, modest, a quiet building tucked between rows of older apartments, far from the polished streets he was used to. Snow had gathered unevenly along the sidewalks, untouched in places, worn down in others. He didn't hesitate. He knocked. Once. Then again. A pause. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Lila stood there, wrapped in a simple coat, her hair slightly damp from melted snow, her eyes calm but tired. Not surprised. Just still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan had faced boardrooms, billion-dollar deals, crises that would break most men. None of it had prepared him for this. "I was wrong," he said. No hesitation, no pride, just truth. Lila didn't respond immediately, because apologies were easy. Understanding was not. "He spoke," Ethan added, his voice softer now. "Noah?" He spoke. Something flickered in her eyes. Not shock, not triumph, just quiet relief. "What did he say?" she asked. Ethan swallowed. "He asked for you." Silence stretched between them. Then, carefully, "He called you Mommy." This time, Lila closed her eyes briefly, as if steadying something deep inside her, not because she didn't feel it, but because she felt it too much. "I never tried to replace her," she said quietly. "I know." Ethan's voice didn't break, but something in it did. "I know that now." A long pause. Then he said the words he never thought he would say. "I need your help." Lila studied him. Not the suit, not the wealth, but the man standing in front of her. And for the first time, he didn't look powerful. He looked human. "What about him?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't pretend to misunderstand. "I need to be better for him," he said. "But I don't know how." That was the truth, and it was enough. Lila nodded once. Not as agreement, but as acceptance. "Then let's go back," she said. When they returned to the mansion, everything felt different. Not the walls, not the lights, but the atmosphere. Something had shifted. Upstairs, Noah sat exactly where Ethan had left him. The music box, still in his hands. The room still quiet, but no longer empty. When Lila stepped inside, he looked up immediately. No hesitation, no fear, just recognition. And then, movement. He stood, slowly, uncertainly, but on his own. Lila didn't rush forward, didn't speak. She simply knelt, opening her arms slightly, and waited. Noah took one step, then another, until he reached her, and leaned in. Soft, fragile, real. Lila held him gently, not tightly, not possessively, just present. Behind them, Ethan stood frozen, because this was something no amount of power could create. No contract, no system, no control, only trust. and love. A few moments passed. Then Noah pulled back slightly. His eyes lifted, looking at Lila, searching. And then, he spoke again, clearer this time, stronger. Mommy. The word landed softly in the room, but it changed everything. Ethan turned away slightly, his hand brushing his face. Not hiding, just feeling, because this wasn't loss. This was something new, something unexpected, something healing. That night, the Hawthorne mansion finally felt warm again, not because of the decorations, but because of the people inside it. They sat together in the living room, the Christmas tree glowing softly beside them, snow falling quietly beyond the windows. No grand speeches, no dramatic declarations, just presence. Noah sat between them, holding both their hands, not letting go, and for the first time, Ethan didn't try to control it, didn't question it, didn't fear it. He simply allowed it to be. Later, as midnight approached, Noah's voice, still soft, still learning, filled the room again. Small words, simple sounds, but each one a step forward, each one a miracle. Ethan looked at Lila, not as an employee, not as a solution, but as someone who had given his son something he couldn't buy, a second chance, not just for Noah, but for him too. Thank you, he said quietly. Lila smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough. Sometimes, she said softly, people don't need to be fixed. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding now. They just need someone to stay. Outside, the church bells began to ring. Midnight, Christmas Day, and inside the mansion that had once been filled with silence, a new kind of family had begun. Not perfect, not complete, but real, and that was enough.